Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's AeHIN Hour. Please be reminded that all microphones are muted throughout the meeting. For comments, please use the chat box, and for questions, please use the questions box. Tonight's speaker is Eduardo Dzierski, CEO and CTO of Instead. Prior to this, he was the principal architect for the Enterprise Architecture Guidance Team at Microsoft, overseeing products, books, and training designed for architects and technical strategy decision makers. May we now call on our speaker, Sir Ed?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning for different people. I will start sharing my screen. And before we get started, I would just want to make sure that we're all seeing the right screen. You should be seeing a presentation that says facility registries with a lot of red dots on the map. And is this size good enough? And is this mode of presentation good enough? I'm worried that if I start going between presentation mode and not, the screen might stop sharing. Are you still seeing the screen?
Yes. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So let's get started. The topic of today is facility registries, and I wanted to thank all the AeHIN group for hosting this. Instead, and our organization have seen there's a lot of challenges, obviously, in health systems, as I'm sure most of people on this call witness. And a lot of it really sometimes boils down to the right piece of information in the right place at the right time. And I think some years ago, when a lot of our countries started implementing different parts of what eventually becomes the national health information system, in the beginning, there isn't much overlap, right? Like there's one tuberculosis system, there's a supply chain system, and there's like a disease surveillance system, and some places of medical records. But over time, for good patient care, for good health systems management, for efficient planning, for population transparency, all these things need to start talking each other. A doctor needs to be able to refer a patient to the right facility, providing the right services, and not have them guess where to go and then discover last minute that, I don't know, they send somebody to take a diagnostic test and that diagnostic device wasn't working, or a health planning group cannot make good planning of their services if for example, only public owned facilities are considered in a database of catchment, but not the private facilities, and so on. So obviously, starting with the health of the population and like the quality of care and all the way to the efficiency of the management, we need to start increasing the bar and raising the quality of the solutions. And a good, easy way of doing that is to start integrating the places where key data sets are shared or contributed and consumed by different actors in the health information system, right? So typically, when you look at your health information system, there'll be a bunch of entities that tend to touch a lot of functionality. And one of them is facilities, the other one is staff, the other one is patient identifiers, the other one might be vocabularies, and so on and so forth. And a good way to start improving this quality of care and the system efficiency is to start having better management of those data sets, because those data sets are the ones that will lift all boats, right? When you improve something in the way you manage the data about facilities, all the systems that use that will benefit. Systems that do patient care, systems that do reporting, and so on and so forth. So this was a slide I presented many years ago in ASDMH, and you all know that the picture that's depicted here, like the systems are typically an archipelago, and like some systems are in our countries are famous and receive a lot of investment and are like cornerstone things we're really proud of. And then there's like this very long list of little systems that people forget about, that just keep accreting over time. And just like people, sometimes finding the right doctor might seem like well, the right staff person might seem like searching your contact book for, or add your Facebook page for who knows who, right? You call a hospital and you ask them if that person works there and so on. The same thing happens with facilities, right? Where it's really, in this day and age, it's really kind of embarrassing that sometimes we have to say like, oh, what is the official name of this health facility, so that we can write them a check, or are they actually providing this service in general? Do they have electricity right now so their fridges work so I can send them some vaccinations? There's a lot of there's a higher expectation for quality of care. So facility registries, right? Well, let's talk about what the opportunity is that they materialize. First of all, a facility registry is, by its definition, what a working group considers to be a central authority and source for facility data, right? Like it is the place where decisions about what data will be captured is materialized. It's the place where you decide how things will be updated, by whom and when, who will have access to make those updates, or which systems will have access to make those updates, and then determine who gets to consume that data directly, or what data can be shared so it can propagate through the system. Like one thing, and one term I hear a lot when we're presenting is like master facility lists. And then in the same conversation, it's master facility registries. And sometimes people get really confused. And I just wanted to make sure people get it, that the master facility registry is a system that allows governance of, of a database of facilities. And a master facility list is an example of such data. As such, you should have one facility registry for some scope of work, for your health information system, for your NGO, and so on and so forth. But it's totally acceptable that this master facility registry allows more than one copy of of a master facility list to exist and propagate. But it's not very common. Usually, if you imagine it as like a table, usually what you have is a master facility registry will only share some rows and some columns with different systems, and some systems will want only some columns but a lot of rows, and other systems will care only about certain facilities, some rows, but really care about a lot of the columns, for example, to make a provincial assessment of coverage and whatnot. And we spoke about the benefits of having a facility registry. And another thing that happens, because it's a central authority for facility data, it is also a good opportunity to consolidate what can be called the business rules, the ministries, the NGOs, etc., rules of governance and curation of this data. Like, for example, who decides whether a facility is open or closed? Who can change that in the database? Who has permissions? Who needs to approve it? And so on and so forth. A facility registry provides a single place where, if a working group, for example, across the ministry, decides what it means to have a facility open or closed and who can mark a facility as open and closed, you can now enforce that curation decision so that all the different people and actors and sub-organizations in the ministry have one trustworthy source that is following it. All right, so there's a questions list in the GoToWebinar tool. If you all want to use it, I will have it open, and then I will interrupt myself and answer at the right time. So feel free to just type questions and answers. There's only one question from Alvin Marcelo, which is called Elan, which I have no idea what that means. So so when you look at what is opportunity for the data, right? one of the things that people start asking about early on is like, can we standardize on what the names and IDs of these things are, right? Like, you know that, for example, you do one census project and of your health facilities and you end up with one list of IDs. Then some NGO uses another list of IDs for the same facilities. And then, I don't know, like a tuberculosis program might use a different set of IDs for a different set of facilities. And so standardizing identity, being able to say, facility 123 in my old database is the same as facility XYZ in the tuberculosis system, is the same as the facility LMN in my I don't know, supply chain system, is really important, and it can start driving the ability to coalesce and accumulate data in the registry that comes from multiple places, and also to make sure that more places can consume the benefits of having better updated data sets, right? Another, of course, huge opportunity is to, once you have a facility registry, you can see your changes over time. And then there's changes about like how many facilities you have, like their operations, and all sorts of knowledge and insight can be gained just by looking at the facilities as a fleet, as a whole. Where are they? Where are they not? Where, even just like, it's very telling sometimes to see where the updates to the data are coming from and where it's not. And just, it allows you to get intelligence over your facility risk, facility fleet. And then finally, another part of the opportunity is an improved scope, right? Where you can, because you have what is called like the snowball effect, right? And the Japanese katamari, that you start accreting data, and the more data you have, the more data you can accumulate, and then it becomes like a snowball of useful information. You can start accumulating fields across different domains that start benefiting other groups. So let's move forward. I'm going to show the actual examples of the tools in a second. But before we move into the technology, I want to remind something that a lot of people miss when we are playing with implementations. They see sometimes facility registries as a technology program, and that is a mistake. It's a mistake. Seeing a facility registry implementation as a technology program is going to lead to a lot of delays and pains and political infighting and lack of collaboration, right? Basically, when you instantiate and implement a facility registry in a context, you are agreeing on a certain data governance process, right? And the data governance process, sometimes when you start in ministries of health that may not have had much of this beforehand, is about taking something that was pretty much free form and laissez-faire, anybody could do whatever they wanted or whatever they could, right? To like doing something that helps everybody. But that represents a shift of power. That can represent, some people might see it as a threat to their power. And implementing a social process, you have to be very mindful of those like ripples in decision making and social dynamics and power dynamics. For example, in a facility registry, you have to make decisions of like who makes decisions about what facility can be added in, why, how, and when, and who will make that decision, right? For example, if you're going to have to capture certain fields in the facility registry, which working group will help define that data dictionary? If you're going to say which systems send data into the facility registry or consume data from the facility registry, who's going to decide that, and how is that going to be enforced? And who's going to decide the data sharing terms and intellectual property and other things that come about it? When you implement a facility registry, you're implementing a new social process in a Ministry of Health that just happens to be made possible because of technology. But if an implementation project misses the social aspect, it's gonna fail. So we've helped implement multiple national health facility registries, and then multiple what I could call subnational health facility registries. Facility registries for NGOs that are so large and broad in their scope of operations that they're almost parastatal and they collaborate with the state in their efforts. And some of these implementation tips you will realize are generic good project management tips. But the first one is to be patient and take your time, because you're instantiating a social process. Not making the time to have the right people at the table can cause a lot of pain down the line. So making sure that you are planning for inclusion is the right thing. That's not to say you might need to have an ineffective decision-making process. Like, I would not recommend anybody to have like a ministry-wide consensus-based practice to make decisions for the facility registry. But you want to make sure that at least certain stakeholders accept or consent to some decisions being done and transferred to the facility registry committee. Then start small and concrete. Showing results is powerful, and sometimes waiting for the big unveil is not the right pattern. Sometimes just starting with a facility registry that just has a couple of facility lists that you were able to, I don't know, get from somebody's Excel spreadsheet and somebody's Access database, and you were able to like send into like a simple reporting system, can have more of a chance of success than a facility registry that is worked on for years and like everybody wonders what the program is because they don't announce anything. And then again, because we're instilling a social process, it needs champions, people who will influence people, who will move people, and who can negotiate, facilitate, and help moderate the discussions that go with it. Another obvious tip is achieve one use of data goal first. One of the big things that happens when you start building these building blocks that are like back-end plumbing for your health information systems, a lot of folks in the health realm will go like, so what? I mean, what does it matter if I have this database of facilities? It's like, tell me one patient that's going to get better. Tell me one thing that got better. And we recommend achieving one use of data goal, like something that shows impact early on, to help create that positive snowball effect. And I put not HMIS because there's two reasons for that. First of all, depends on the country, but like HMIS is typically a function that has their own kind of like goals and ways of curating data and so on, that sometimes are not exactly the same goals as health delivery. They're doing reporting and like intelligence and reporting to the outside, and sometimes that creates like the notion that we're not doing anything differently. So even though your HMIS data might come from a facility registry, everybody will go like, I don't know, it's the same. We still have the same graphs and charts and whatnot. It doesn't feel like we have anything new. And then another reason why I don't recommend the HMIS group as the first one is because in a lot of nascent, kind of early in their maturity model, growing ministries of health, the HMIS team is one of the first ones to start creating a lot of decision-making and technology power. And one of the things that we see is that sometimes it's hard to, they're one of the harder teams to bring on board on the fact that there might be another system managing the master facility list. So we recommend just not giving more temptation to that, keeping that control by like going to another team. I don't know, a health delivery team, a tuberculosis team, a supply chain team, a public portal, or something like that, to be able to just show something beyond HMIS. And then like just once you have that seed, start with source and curation additively accreted over time. So that means you start with something small, and then you say, well, what if we brought in the information that people have updated in, I don't know, DHIS2? What subset of the list does that cover? How will we curate that? How will we accept it as being of the right quality, review it, approve it, and then decide to share it out in the world? And then you ask the same set of questions again about pieces of information coming from, I don't know, data collection exercises with tablets and your supply chain project, and any other thing that might be giving you facility data. And with this, I'm going to just stop. But like we were in the opening screen for the webinar, AeHIN had like put a picture of a SpaceX mission control. And you know, it's funny because today SpaceX is doing one of their test static fires for one of their largest rockets yet, the Falcon Heavy. And it's a very carefully planned and orchestrated rehearsal of what it means to load a rocket up with fuel and turn it on. And it might blow up. And facility registries, if you start doing some steps and you try just testing it out, it won't blow up, right? So I think that's a main difference that you know, you have to keep in mind. It's safe to iterate, start small, pause, then continue. There won't be like a big fireball in your face if you make a mistake with how you load your first Excel spreadsheet. But there is a similarity and like a parallelism with the space missions. You know, before people used to say that software got shipped. You know, you actually put it in a box with diskettes or CD-ROMs, and then it got put in a ship and shipped, right? And it got to people's homes, and then they installed it, right? And with the age of the internet, we launch systems. And this facility registry is something that gets launched, right? And once you launch it, you cannot just say you're done and go home. The committee, the team responsible for it, is now responsible for a social process of data curation that is supported by the technology. And once you launch that, you have to keep maintaining that process as a living, breathing effort within the ministry, right? And that mission needs to manage continuously over time. How are we doing for time? Okay, let's escape the world of the slides here for a second. And I wanted to show you a couple of actual facility registries from different low and medium income countries. Let's see. So what do we have here? Tanzania. Tanzania is one of our favorite case studies for two reasons. First of all, it came online really fast because they were able to take that incremental growth approach. They decided they wouldn't have to debate every single field and definition with everybody in the ministry. They decided they wouldn't go, you know, wouldn't aim to have 100% of every facility type ever. Like they just started with a pragmatic definition of the data set, collaborated with important groups in the ministry, and were able to create their first version super rapidly. Then another reason why I really liked how Tanzania progressed is because instead of relying on like a lot of like, I don't know, Instead or external consultants for a lot of the systems that surround the facility registry, they asked us to choose and train local companies to do that for them. So we basically created a market for a Tanzanian company to supply the needs of the Ministry of Health in building all the data curation systems, public portals, and things like that. So what you're looking at now in a tool called Resource Map, which happens to be made by Instead, is the actual live health facility registry of Tanzania, which I'm lucky enough that they have given me access to. And by the way, they actually keep a big chunk of the data set public. There's around 9,000 facilities now. The first version of the registry a handful of years ago started with 6,000. And over time, they've been incrementing the scope of the data, the completeness of the data, the quality of the data. We're looking here at a user interface for the facility registry, but I wanted to also note that a facility registry could very well be a web service that has no user interface, right? Like just a system that is driven via APIs. But that would tend to be like extremely uncomfortable for people who want to do simple things like define the data dictionary visually and so on. One of the important aspects of building a facility registry is that it has to support data, APIs, and exports in all sorts of formats and protocols and whatnot to be able to promiscuously share the data with as many systems as possible, as easily as possible. So just here on the screen, you already see like RSS, JSON, JSON, CSV as example exports, and then there's all sorts of there's 4 different flavors of API that we can share. And obviously the system is built to mix data management and geographic information systems characteristic. I don't know, and for example, has to be fast. So if I search for things that have, I don't know, add to, I'm making this up, boom, out of 9,000 facilities, I should be able to just get these in way less than a second, right? And that is a performance of the user interface, but also should be the performance via the API. Let's start exploring something here. So I'm sure you want to see what sort of fields they have in the facility registry, and I'm going to go into some of these features later on. So typically one organizes the. By the way, is this to the other organizers? Is this a good enough font size, or do you want me to zoom in a little bit for the screen share?
I think it would be better if we zoom in a little.
There you go. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
No worries. So the layers are like collections of fields that the Tanzanian Ministry of Health decides to capture and track for each facility. Just putting together the data dictionary for this is in of itself a very collaborative process. You have to decide on a facility identifier type that that will satisfy long-term needs, right? And for example, they choose a LUN format, which is like a numeric format with a checksum digit. You have to agree on the administrative divisions and where they will come from, right? And what they will be ID'd as, right? So just agreeing on what this tree is and what the places are called and who should give you that list and that tree and in what format is in of itself a fun collaborative process. Then they have to decide a lot of the different IDs that the different facilities have accumulated over time from different projects, right? And you can see the ones that the Tanzanian Facility Registry decided on capturing are the ones that affect different MOH projects and programs. And every country will have their own list of IDs, but this is a very common pattern, a list of ID mappings where this facility has this ID, this ID, this ID, and this ID, right? For different codes that were assigned over time. Then you will see common fields like contact information, right? A physical, fax number, mobile, right? The national ID number, like the document number of the people of the that are in charge of the facility, right? The website, physical location data, right? The description of the location, altitude, catchment metadata, other things like that. And then over time, because they were able to start building this positive effect in the ministry of hey, this is something that is adding value to our programs, let's continue to add value to it. They were able to capture increasingly larger amounts of data. For example, how many patient beds, what sterilization and infection control mechanisms they have, what are their sources of energy, what is your source of water, what is the mobile networks that you have coverage for, and other kind of pieces of metadata that once you start having them for a lot of facilities, it can really help a lot of programs. For example, if you wanted to work with a mobile operator to decide who will get free credits on the phone, just knowing which facilities don't have coverage with that operator can give you negotiating power to say, hey, yeah, sure, we'll do this project with you, but I want you to go make sure that these 100 facilities have signal with your company before I do that. And then the service is offered, and this is another place where people underestimate the amount of collaborative effort that it takes to imagine just agreeing on the list of TB diagnosis, care, and treatment codes that you will track for facilities with all the groups that deal with TB diagnosis, care, and treatment in a Ministry of Health, right? So, and again, the same advice applies. It's start small. If you can put 2 options and other, right, in the beginning, then you can slowly start adding resolution and detail into the data set. And then finally, some classification, some official metadata. And sometimes we've even seen with what do you call it, like financial data kept in there, like for payments and whatnot. And as you have all this information, obviously not everybody can see all the data, right? I happen to have access to it because I helped the consulting group build it, and they kept me with some permissions. But here you see all the people that have permissions, and again, this, like, for example, there's people from the malaria consortium can see these fields, but cannot, like, can read these fields, cannot update them, and cannot see these footer fields. So who knows what all these groups of folks are, but then you can see how the ministry is managing who can see what when. And that applies both to human users and also to to systems and applications that are being users of the data. Other important things, I don't know, because sometimes it's important to analyze not just the history of updates of one facility, but you want to see how your facilities evolved as a set. For example, if you wanted to calculate increased health coverage year after year, we have like abilities to do like snapshots, right? Where you can basically take a snapshot and remember what all your facilities data was like on a certain day. And you can see that they've been taking snapshots a couple per year, probably after like big changes in data dictionary or big changes in updates, over the years. Okay, so yikes, Alvin Marcero. If a country already has several facility registries, what can they do to retain legacy data but shift to the unified facility registry systems? In other countries, who owns is responsible for the national facility registry? Okay, so two big questions. So thanks, Alvin, for prompting some questions. So if the country already has several facility registries, what they do to retain the legacy data but shift to the unified facility registry system? So I think the first step is to stop calling them all facility registries. Like, different groups have registries of data that suffice of data and facilities that they need, but it's not like the master facility registry of the country anymore. And you can see them as sources of information, things that send data in to your facility registry. I'm going to show that in a second. But basically, it could be, you could sometimes start with lists that nobody will ever update again, like, I don't know, that Excel spreadsheet, that Access database that you do a one-time import. Or they could be ongoing updates, right? For example, I don't know, it could be your immunization team who has better information about what fridges are working or not. So why wouldn't you want to extract that information from the immunization system? And then you just have to decide those pieces of partial data, how they will be approved into the master facility registry so that every other system can then consume it. One thing that's important is that sometimes a lot of these other entities in the Ministry of Health are updating facility data for very good reasons. They might have timeliness needs, right? For example, knowing whether a fridge is working or not is really important to the people who are taking supplies to that facility. Whereas, for example, I don't know, the HMIS system really couldn't care less whether that piece of information gets here in January or in December. So I think one pattern is to always allow the systems that need to be updating facility data to do it, and either trust them enough to do it well enough to directly update the facility registry fields that they have access to, or allow them to do it in a way that then can be propagated through curation into the facility registries. Hope that answers that question. And which entity is responsible for the facility registry? So usually it's a team within the Ministry of Health, not the HMIS. Usually it's a subset of the health information systems and architecture, and it changes by country. One thing I wanted to show here is interesting is, let's look at the activity, all the stuff that's been going. And like, what is it today? Today's 24 January 2018. And I want you to see that we're looking at the activity stream, right? Like all the update feed, the wall, right? Of what's going on in the facilities. And you can see they have two databases, one for the final facilities that get published to all of Tanzania and the world, and one that has more like a draft list of facilities that is more the curation data. And you can see today's the 24th. And today, the January 24th, you can see they've been updating. All these updates have been happening like the 24th, and then the 21st, and then the 18th. You can see there is a lot of updates. For example, they're putting a standard name right here, right? They're like, changing the caps lock so that people's eyes don't hurt, right? And you can see that they're changing the ownership, right? And you can see all the different updates that are happening. And why is that? Because the Ministry of Health, the IT team, not the IT team, sorry, the data management team decided to hire some part-time folks within the ministry to every day do data curation. So they basically have an application that we help them build, but it's a Tanzanian application where people show up at work and they have an inbox, but instead of an inbox of emails, they have an inbox of facility changes. And they kind of manually review some approval. They approve things manually. Sometimes they call the facility to verify. Sometimes they check with the boss. Sometimes they just do data quality updates, like not making it all caps lock, right? And they just keep doing this day after day after day. And you can see this is a live process. Like we're just looking at updates in January in the last days. Like this is the 23rd of January still. And then we can see some Ethiopia activity registry as well. But look at all the Tanzanian activity. This is a live living database. Okay, so let's go into some practical things. I wanted to just common topics that come up, and Alvin just brings it up, is bring it on the cloud. And I would actually say not only yes, but we super, super strongly recommend you that it go in the cloud. The same way that we track infant mortality for children that die, and we want to see which children die under age 5 and never reach kind of adulthood. When you do systems and enterprise architecture and like portfolio management, you also track your lifetime of your systems. And I can tell you that one of the biggest things we see is a reason why facility registry efforts die and all that effort goes away is because the country insists on local hosting. And instead of paying $200 a year or $500 a year for hosting, or not paying anything, for example, if you host it with Instead, like Tanzania doesn't pay for their hosting and their management. We manage that servers because it's free. I mean, just like Google manages their servers, Instead manages our own. And like the Tanzania people don't have to worry about updates, cybersecurity, things like that. We have an agreement signed with them that makes us accountable to having those good practices for them. But then they just get it for free. And like what we see is that countries that decide to not do it for free end up holding the bill. And then the bill is expensive, and then the skill set is scarce. And like they don't have, ministries of health are not optimized to attract staff that, for example, will be updating servers, tracking the latest cybersecurity issue, or looking at what is the latest update of MongoDB, and like making sure everything works overnight. So I would say cloud hosting not only is a possibility, I would recommend it. And one of the things that Instead has been doing with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for our Ethiopia facility registry implementations is drafting cloud hosting agreements that the Ministry of Health can sign with whoever. I mean, there's a version for Instead, but they could use it with whatever vendor, that kind of guarantee all the terms of data ownership of the ministry, all the agreements to have accessibility, all the agreements to have resources in escrow. That means, like, for example, if a company goes bankrupt, right, that data doesn't go poof and disappear from one day to the next, right, and you have the right off-ramps. So all those things are encoded in a legal document. And then by signing it, the ministry can know that they own their data, that they're just like handling off technical operations to another group, and it creates like legal accountability for management. So yeah, store it in the cloud. Same thing is like, who gets to get the data, and like, can they do anything with the data? Well, like actually, like for Ministry of Health to have the data facility registry allows them to share, for example, the data with a license that says that they have to get attribution. So for example, if a university from, let's say, Harvard shows up and they want to write all these papers about the health facilities in your country, by licensing the data the right way, they're obligated to like acknowledge the contribution of the Ministry of Health in the data and in the data results they have, right? It creates a more like gives the ministry an opportunity to create fair terms of use on how they share the data. Another common topic that comes up is like whether the APIs of the facility registries are accessible on the internet. And they shouldn't say public, it should say on the internet, right? Which means that they're accessible by any system that then has to have the right permissions inside the facility registry, of course. And the answer to this is obviously absolutely. As we'll see in a second, there's a lot of systems that integrate, and even in countries where they decide to put an enterprise service bus in front of a lot of building blocks of the health information system, hiding data registries behind an information service bus is not a pattern. It's an anti-pattern, actually. So yes, you have to expect that your facility registry will have an API. You control access via the permissions, but that API, will be accessible through multiple systems that might live on the internet. So let's talk a little bit about what those can be. Typically, in a facility registry ecosystem, you will find all these beasts and animals. You'll have different old sources of data that you will use as one-time imports to improve the facility registry. And one thing that I wanted to note is that, like how sometimes we denote databases with a little drum, right? And I wanted to make sure that people don't see the facility registry as a drum. It's not just a database. It is a web service that enforces business rules, workflow rules, and other sorts of quality checks and access checks on the data to ensure that the data that is held inside conforms to the requirements of the facility registry, right? It's not just a simple database. You don't get to write fields remotely and things like that. So then there's like different data collection efforts. Sometimes facilities can self-report updates. There might be other HMIS, DHIS, or other systems. For example, you could be having imports from, you have updates to facility data from the supply chain system. And then it all goes through like collection and curation, application and service that will be used by local users to approve changes, push back on changes, ask for more information, and with an ongoing process of review, merge, and approvals, make it to the facility registry, right? They've met the quality bar, or they sit there until resolved or abandoned. Then sometimes either direct entry by users, like we saw in the Tanzania example, they're just like editing a lot of information through a curation service. But you can also log in. I can also log into the tool and make changes to the facility if I have the right permissions, right? And sometimes it's the same application as collection and curation, but you might have like a data maintenance toolkit that, for example, I don't know, like with like scripts and little programs that address special needs. For example, you might want to look for duplicate facilities in a accelerated fashion. So you can have these, imagine like toolkits of accessories that don't manage the data themselves, but like look into the data and come up with a conclusion and help the maintenance effort overall. And then you'll have all these sort of things that consume the facility registry data and subsets of the facility registry data. For example, a public portal that the population can access, spatial analytics projects, supply chain, patient referral, data warehouses, outbreak response, HMIS, procurement. You can imagine all the different groups that could benefit from an updated list. And they could be MOH and third party. They could be ongoing integrations where that they will be reading the facility registry live on every update, or maybe they just come lazily every 6 months and refresh their snapshots and then move on. And then you can also integrate directly with enterprise service buses, and from there on to whatever the enterprise service bus deals with, right? If you have that. Alvin, anybody else? Any other questions?
Nope. There are none so far. Ed.
All right. Hopefully people understand me. It's very early here, so if I speak fast, it's because I'm tired. So let's so we show the Tanzania. Let's show other pieces of these accessory systems. So this is one that Ethiopia, put together. And where do I have a poster here? I was just looking for it. So this is the Ministry of Health of Ethiopia. And it's a pretty large country with a pretty I mean, facility data isn't big, right? So you have these little data sets of 30,000 facilities and so on. They're not millions of rows and records and things like that. But I mean, but the data is very important. I call it it's small but critical data as opposed to big data. And this is like some poster they put together for their project. And you see, for example, that they've said, hey, right now in our Ethiopian facility registry, we already included these sources of data, and these are the additional data that will come over time. Like, they acknowledge that it is a live process to grow and grow and grow and start becoming the master facility registry for more and more systems. And you can see the benefits that they've had, from many systems with different scopes to one place, to no common identifiers to better mapping, and many grassroots or like foreign data efforts that came and went. Like now the Federal Minister of Health has like open source tools that are maintained. And when some NGO comes to the country and is like, oh, I want to do work with data and the facility information, they just say, use this system. We'll give you permissions. You'll access the APIs. But this is the system you use, and just, it's no discussion, right? And then, yeah, they have like the same pattern. You see the identifiers, infrastructure data, staffing data, contact details, services providers. You'll see the same themes appearing in every facility registry data dictionary. And let me show you actually what, one of their first things they did is put together a portal to allow the population to access it. And I think I have it here. So this is just a staging site because actually I don't remember their actual URL, but it's basically like a user-facing portal where people can just go and, I don't know, search for anything that I hope has some hits, right? And they can see how fast it goes, and it shares all around Ethiopia for the health facilities. And this is like live data from the facility registry. You can see what services they have, if they've had photos updated or not, and they're still working on the photo stuff. But one very interesting thing right now is that they allowed in Ethiopia for people to report an issue, right? So as a citizen, right, as a population member, I can say this was closed, it was wrong, I called, the number wasn't there, they didn't actually give tuberculosis diagnostic, so that's wrong. Maybe it's like, it's too expensive, right? Who knows what sort of complaints they will get, right? But I wanted to just highlight that you can even include the population as part of your feedback loop about your facilities, right? And it's very interesting to think about what happens with this data. Like, does it just go to the ministry? Does it get also shared with a third-party NGO for accountability purposes, and so on and so forth? But this is like a very simple website that will give access to developers and the population who want to use the data, in a free way. So let's I don't know. Now you get it. It's just like it looks like a little bit like Google Maps because it's the same idea. You're looking in a big database of places. What is the minimum number of staff to maintain a national facility registry? What are the factors to consider in staffing? So I don't think it requires anybody to be a full-time manager of it. I think what it mostly needs is that people don't drop the ball, right? That it is an acknowledged activity that requires XX hours. I think that's a very interesting question to maybe go and extract and evaluate from Ethiopia and Tanzania and Rwanda and whatnot. Which one is this? This one is Rwanda. And just ask them how much staff it takes, because usually it means that there's some staff member that will help run these meetings and like have run a committee and so on, and then there will be like lower level staff members who assist with the facility data management, but they're not dedicated to that. Those could be like people who work, I don't know, HMIS data quality, and they just spend 3 hours a week on facility data. It's not a big thing, but what's important is that it happens in an ongoing basis. And I mentioned like showing and some of these questions are like, oh, it looks like each facility registry is really like its own world, but you're seeing not like the Ethiopia data dictionary had the same flavors as the Tanzania data dictionary. I mean, their fields might be encoded a little bit differently, obviously, for a lot of historical reasons, but you can see the same themes coming out, right? Like who the data is shared with and where the data comes from is also a very common thing. And we've been trying to like track better like the different requirements around facility registries. Even the Philippines is there, Alvin, where we had user stories, and user stories are just a convenient and good way of expressing requirements. And we've been like trying to track like with different interviews with different peoples, kind of like how common the requirements are. And obviously some of these are worded a bit generically, but what we see is that if you getting down all the way to like data field definitions, you'll see like around 90% commonality. Like countries that haven't talked to each other about like facility registries, haven't attended these shared talks, like gave like around 80 to 90% shared requirement lists for for their facility registries. And that tells me that it's something that is it's a concept that is mature enough and intuitive enough that it's not a complicated thing to come in. I mean, probably with just a little bit like capacity building and knowledge transfer, you can get up and running really fast. Let me see. So I showed a public portal, right? I mean, another example of use of data is like doing geospatial analysis, and maybe we can do this. Show it here. I was actually taking that same screenshot. What we're looking at here is another system that connects to the facility registries, right? But it's a different application, and it connects, it interoperates with the facility registry as a consumer of data. It doesn't really send updates to the facility registry, it's read-only. But what this does, it combines very high, what do you say, like, what's going on here? Very high resolution population maps with the road network of the whole country and the map of the whole facility registry to be able to calculate catchment and where the underserved populations are. So you're looking at a map of Ethiopia now, and what looks like little red dots aren't like facilities or anything like that. You're actually looking at population density in a super high resolution form, right? Like this is like down to like almost like 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, or sometimes even higher resolution population, right? Like when people say, oh, there's so many people in the district, it's like, who cares? Like what matters is like how many people are in like each spot, right? So so PlanWise is a tool that, for example, allows you to import data from the facility registry, and they show up on your map and as measles, right? And you'll see all these dots now coming up, right? Now those are not settlements; those are like health centers and whatnot. And then it combines that with knowledge about the topography of the place and the road network, and allows you to calculate covered population as well as uncovered population, right? So this allows you, for example, to do two things. First of all, to look at the impact of your current facilities and health infrastructure. And also, I don't have this in the UI right now, but it allows you to come up with better plans for where the next facilities will be. Let me see if I can find that screenshot. So basically, the system runs an optimization algorithm, and you plug in some numbers. You say, for example, a new facility costs $1 million, and like adding services to a facility costs, I don't know, $500,000, and then you say, okay, how can I spend $5 million to maximize my coverage? And the thing just calculates in the background, and then comes up with the plans where you can say, oh, look, you can increase for very little money your coverage a lot. Then you can increase a lot of your coverage by spending a little bit of money, and then over time, obviously, you can spend more and more money to get that extra 1% in coverage, right? So, okay, yeah, question from Derek. Hey, Derek, I didn't know you were here. Please, can you talk about how a facility registry participates in a health information exchange? What patterns and standards come into play? Great. So yeah, in a health information exchange that's being set up by a country, right? You have different ways to interact with other systems, right? We mentioned directly as a supplier consumer of data to different APIs that are fit to purpose for every other system, and then through ESBs or other like enterprise integration patterns, like and I think in a health information exchange, right, you're typically talking about this. You're talking about the most mature kind of like like end game of like you have the enterprise service bus set up, and you have a team that all it does, it manages the business rules of like interoperability and message flow in the service bus, and you have all that like set up in your ministry somehow. And when you do that, you typically deal with ESBs through two sorts of APIs. One of them typically is more message-based, right? Which is, for example, what you would use if you wanted to process updates, right? Or if you wanted to trigger events. And by that, I mean, for example, if a facility goes from being closed to being open, your ESB could encapsulate a lot of business rules about how, what needs to happen in the health information system when a facility opens, right? And if you have that in place, then you could get a message from the facility registry, and then that will percolate and have all these like cascading effects in the health information exchange. Also, you could have message-based incoming. For example, if the enterprise service bus from the health information exchange wants to push an update or some other form of a command into the facility registry. And it doesn't need to be about the data itself. For example, you could imagine a very advanced scenario where removing somebody from the HR system both removes them from the ability to log in to the facility registry and also removes their permission, right? So like you can think of like how you would manage the metadata as well. And then finally, you can have like more data query centric APIs, right? Where you're like looking at subsets of the data and querying it with different, different subsets, like different fields and different rows. Some standards are open about like what fields and rows you might get, and then it's up to the enterprise service bus to like query for what they need. Hey, just give me the name and the open status and the services provided for all the facilities in this province, or like check whether this facility actually provides this service right now. Or sometimes, for example, in standards like CSD, the actual rows are open, but which are the fields that get exchanged get standardized, right? And what you'll see is that there's different kind of metadata you can put in your facility registry data dictionary to map it to different standards. And what I mean by that is, for example, if I don't know, let's say I'm just going to go to Tanzania, maybe. Yeah. In your data dictionary, you might have, for example, coming from your terminology discussions, the agreement that our list of services is a list that will be identified with a certain, series of identifiers and like, with certain codes. Like that semantic mapping, right? Saying like this field in the facility registry is that field in our health information exchange, in some other system, is something that is very important. So for example, if you have a supply chain thing and they really care about the motorcycles, right? You could say that in supply chain version 1.0 terminology, this is like motonam, right? You can start like adding these semantic tags to your field so that when they get published, both the standard as CSD or whatever, or the API knows which pieces of information to go for. So this further helps with the interoperability aspects. So let me see here. It's sometimes enterprise service buses can give the impression that they coalesce a lot of the integration decision making, and they do, but it comes at an expense, which is like a very centralized decision making. At least in my experience with ministries of health, and this is like one of those self-assessment things. Like how most drivers say that they're better drivers than the majority, right? It's a very common thing. Well, I think that most ministries of health think they're more open and more flexible and more agile than they really are. And sometimes what happens when you have an architecture, technical architecture that coalesces and centralizes power and decision making, actually it might like close the doors for some of the opportunities for innovation and data exchange that happen around the edge. So that's why I'm always an advocate of using patterns. The right solution to the right problem in the right context, depending on each problem, and then ending up with an enterprise architecture made of these patterns, where things go through, integrating one way or another one as they progress in their maturity. Now, this is an old slide. I won't talk about it. So we talked about these 3 countries and the commonality of the requirements. And yeah, we have a lot of experience with this. So I think there's an OHIE facility registry community that, spans a lot of countries beyond those that have implemented OHIE styled facility registries. And like Scott Teasdale at instead.org, has a lot of experience. He just came back from Ethiopia like this week, helping move forward their facility registry efforts. And like he can answer a lot of these questions about like what is the team composition that we need in the Ministry of Health, and what should we do to plan and so on. Those are great questions that can help further kind of like operationalize or normalize the effort of doing facility registries. It's not rocket science. And I think we're starting to build a body of knowledge that can, that goes from like, hey, this is a crazy innovation to no, this is proven practice. And, we have like a roadmap and a pathway from how to go from wherever you are to like giving results. And his email is here. And obviously through AeHIN, you can contact me and I'll gladly route you to either OHIE or the right team, depending on what your question is. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, sir. And also to our participants who actively joined our webinar. We hope to have you again in our future webinars, Sir Ed. Thank you and good morning.
Thanks. I'll be around to answer some questions for a few more minutes. It's only 5 a.m. here, so why not?
All right, sir. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Very nice to see you, Alvin and Derek, if you're still online. Hey, you know what? Do you want me to stop sharing the screen? It seems that there's no
Yes,
more
sir.
questions. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing and then you manage the recording, all right? Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you very much for AeHIN for this opportunity again. And we'd love to help whoever has questions in this area.